Hello, welcome back to Diskshelved with Adam White. This week we're going to be discussing Red Comet, The Short Life and Blazing Art of Sylvia Plath by Heather Clark. Um, in the mid to late 1950s, Sylvia Plath was graduating college, and she had excelled and was at the top of her class, and she had written and published poems and prose, and she just had gone through a lot, and she was looking forward to what she could become and what she could make of herself now that she graduated college. This is what she was greeted with. It was from Adlai Stevenson, who was a presidential candidate, and he said that he gave at Plath's 1955 summer Smith commencement titled A Purpose for Modern Woman. The best way these brilliant graduates could contribute to their nation, Stevenson said, was to embrace the humble role of housewife, which statistically is what most of you are going to be, whether you like the idea or not just now, and you'll like it. Stevenson, the liberal darling of his day, went on, the assignment for you as wives and mothers has great advantages. In the first place, it is homework. You can do it in the living room and with a baby in your lap, or in the kitchen with a can opener in your hands. If you're really clever, you may even end up practicing your saving arts on that unsuspecting man while he's watching television. Not exactly what a young woman wants to hear when she just spent the last 4 years working her tail off to get a good degree and um, has hopes for becoming a writer, a professional writer. So that's the kind of time she was living in, and that's what all those women faced. And a lot of them did end up becoming housewives. It was a really sexist time in America and in the world, and it's really a shame because it helped bring about her downfall. Um, and This biography is like 1,100 pages long, and I was like, she only lived till she was 30. How can there be a biography that long? Well, it's written deftly and really excellently by Heather Clark. Uh, I felt after that many pages that it could have even been longer. It was a joy to read, and uh, it starts out talking about her early life. She always had a talent for writing and drawing, and she I wonder if I can say a couple more times. I've noticed that in my videos, and I'm going to endeavor to not do that as much because I hate that, and then here I am doing it. And I just did it again. She also always had symptoms of depression, especially in high school and college, and that would play a huge role in her life. She did suffer from depression badly, and she it kind of controlled everything that she did, and she could never really be happy with what she produced because she was producing, especially in college, a lot of short stories and poems. She was a published poet and author in college. She published short stories and poems in magazines like 17 and Mademoiselle, which were women's magazines, but that was mainly the market open to women at that time. And even then, it wasn't a large amount of women that were doing the work. Uh, the writing made her happy and stressed at the same time because she never felt it was good enough, and she never felt that she was getting the best out of herself because there was always something weighing on her mind, which turned out to be her depression, and which is something that just wasn't talked about. She had lots of support from her mother, Aurelia, and a woman named Mrs. Prouty, who was a writer. And she kind of took Sylvia under her wing. And she was also very well off and paid for, I believe, her college education. And when she was um in the hospital for the mentally ill the first time, she paid for that too. So these two women cared deeply about Sylvia, and she spent her life resenting them. And again, that was a side effect of the depression. She felt that her mother was overbearing, even though you really don't get the sense that that was the truth in this. I mean, her mother cared a lot. Her mother did a lot for her and really stepped up to the plate every time she needed help and did everything she could to help her. And Sylvia just ended up hating her. And it was a symptom of the depression, which is really a shame. And that Mrs. Prouty as well did a lot for Sylvia over the years. When she was older, living in England, she'd be low on money, and Mrs. Prouty would send her money and always encouraging words and never asked for anything in return. Two very caring people that helped take care of her during her life, and she ended up resenting them both, which is a real shame because they did a lot for her. Also, when she was in the institution, she got electroshock therapy, which scared her to death. She said it felt like she was being murdered, and it really was almost like that because it was just raw shock therapy sending shockwaves through her head. And she was scared to death and said that she would commit suicide before she would ever submit to that again. Uh, in the 1950s, there was no real acknowledgement of mental illness. Uh, as you can tell, when they give shock therapy as what they think the best therapy, or lobotomy or something, and that's just not how you handle it. But they didn't have any drugs, and didn't believe in psychoanalysis that much. And she really suffered a lot when she went and had that electroshock therapy, and it really scarred her for the rest of her life and made her fear the mental institutions because it was such a prevalent thing there that she said that she would kill herself before she ever went back. Um, it was a primitive time for that, and it was stigmatized as well, so they tried not to talk about it to anyone. She really, uh, she was honest about it with her friends, and she did have a suicide attempt. She overloaded on pills and went into a basement behind a woodpile in her house, and she was missing for days, and they didn't know she was in the house. And they went looking for her and looking for her. They were searching the woods for her. They didn't know what had happened to her. They thought she had left. And then it turns out one day a dog started that they had searching her scent started howling at the house. And her brother Warren said, maybe she's here. And he went and found her behind the woodpile, and she had banged her head against the wall trying to knock herself out, but she was still alive. And they got her back to health, and they uh, uh, had to move on from there because, again, she did not want to go back to a facility because she could not stand the idea of being electroshock therapied again. That stigmatized her as well because now she was someone who had tried to commit suicide. Uh, Skipping ahead a little bit, that was in, I believe I think that was when she was in home for a summer for in between college classes. She graduated and then went to England on a fellowship, and it turns out that the sexism in England was even worse than it was in America. The women all had separate classes, although they did that too in America, but they were treated as complete, like, third class citizens, and really were just not looked upon as having any potential for anything other than being a housewife. And they were really stressed to do that. Their teachers even told them, hey, you're going to be a housewife. So it was not something that really worked well for her, and it really hurt her and deepened her depression because she wanted to be a poet and a writer so bad, and that's all she ever wanted to do. She had a hard living time there. There was no heat or air conditioning. She was really susceptible to the weather. She was sick all the time, which also deepened her depression. She met Ted Hughes, who was another poet. She thought he was the perfect man, and that takes over then a lot of this book, the second half of this book. Uh, they had 2 kids together, which may or may not have been a good thing. He also, they never really outright say it, but I would suggest that he had some issues probably with depression too. Their marriage was symbiotic. They both took from each other. They would constantly critique each other's work. Sylvia typed up all his poems and sent them off to get them published, and a lot of them did get published. And he became a very important poet in England. And he was not, though, the perfect husband. He was very moody and didn't treat her as well as he probably should have. I mean, I can guarantee it was not as well as he should have. Um, Later on, Ted has an affair, which just totally brings Sylvia's world crushing down around her. She's spiraling down into her depression, and I would also say, and I know a lot about this because I've got it, but I would venture to guess she was obsessive compulsive too. They never really, Clark never really comes out and says that in here, but uh, I get the sense that she was uh, a bit obsessive compulsive, and Ted Hughes may have been too, because they were always perfectionists, and she just never felt like anything was good enough. And there was a chain of suicides towards the end. It's a very depressing ending to a book, but I mean, it's real life. It's what happened. It's a shame. She really was a talented writer, and her depression really ruined her life because she couldn't get help from it. And she couldn't get anything. Towards the end, they were giving her some medication, but it was some that she shouldn't have had, and it really wasn't the right thing to treat what she had. She was a victim of sexism and suppression, and really it was a failure of society. Society really let Sylvia Plath down. She would have been I mean, she was a great poet and a great writer. And it's a shame because we have so little of her work when we could have had so much more. And she really was a talented writer. I may be doing a video on some of her work later on. Uh, she needed some legit help on this, and she never got it. despite the best efforts of her mother and Mrs. Prouty, they always made sure she tried to have the best care, and she just couldn't get it right, and it ended up costing her her life. Now, this book is excellent, Red Comet. I highly, highly recommend it. It'll take you a little while to read, but it's worth it. Uh, it also doubles as a bomb shelter because it's so big. So it's a win-win. If you have any interest at all in biographies, this is a really good biography. I'd highly recommend it. I'd only scratched the surface of what it encompasses in here. It really has a look at her whole life. A lot of her juvenile poetry and writing is in here. She has a lot. Heather Clark did a masterful job of creating this biography. It was up for a bunch of awards. I don't know if it won that many, but it should have. Excellent, excellent book. I hope you'll give it a check out, and I will see you guys next week.